Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. How's everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. I know that today is a holiday, and there were no classes at the university. And I had mentioned that today was optional if you wanted to attend, but I did want to have the lecture anyway, even if I had a slow attendance. At least it would be recorded if you wanted to take a look at it at your earlier convenience. But I do want to make sure we stayed on target and on schedule. So just give a chance for some more folks to join. Share the screen. Bring up the chat. Anybody had a chance to take a look at the recording from last week? It should be available when you go to Zoom meetings on the left side, and then this pops up, and then you have the cloud recording tab over here from last week. Looks like there's the recording from last week, from last lecture, and these were several office hour meetings. And what are these? These are for today. I think this must be other students who joined and might have left earlier at noon. I guess it records the partial meetings. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at those recordings, if they were of good quality, if you could hear me clearly? Just want to make sure I'm using the correct mic.
Yeah, they were good. I thought so.
Awesome, thanks. I also, so they're available there. I have been adding the recordings as well here. Links, I upload them to YouTube, and created this page where I embedded the recording. Anybody had a chance to take a look at that? If the quality is any good? I believe what happens is when it first gets uploaded, at first the quality might be poor, like it might be 380 pixels wide, and then it progressively gets better at 1080p, and then eventually it should become very, very crisp and good quality. But that's a YouTube thing. So I'm wondering if anybody had a chance to take a look at that and if the quality was any good on YouTube. That's a question I should have answered. I was on the. I'm just going to ask. Awesome. Welcome, Josie. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, awesome. Welcome. Zvelebilova. Oh wow, that's an awesome name.
That was pretty good.
So welcome. Were you able to join Piazza?
I haven't yet. I'm just looking at all the materials for the first time. So
If you go to Piazza here on the left, this should bring you to
Oh, good. Okay.
the channel. And I believe you can join yourself. If not, let me know in on the chat, and I can invite you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's get started. Let's see. Yeah, so let's go over real quick on the organization of the Canvas course. At the beginning, there's resources, which should give you a link to our syllabus, CS5610. Also a link to Piazza. You can access it through Canvas, or you can go directly to the Piazza website. Also, the final project requirements. We're going to go over that today. Just to get you going and have an idea of what the project is all about. And I've been mentioning through the last lecture that it's never too early to get started with the project. And also have a link to the Git repository that you can look up the material that all the source code that we've been working for in this section. Also a link to the required textbook and support, student support, customer support, and whatnot. Here I have you should also have a section that lists all the available office hours, including a map that should list everybody's office hour by hour and by day, so that you have I think a pretty good spread of folks that are available. Mine are on early mornings. I think I said I would put a couple office hours later in the day. Yeah, let me do that. Maybe let's see. I don't know, like Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like around 3-ish, to help the folks on the West Coast. Yeah, so I'll add a couple office hours around here as well. Although you have plenty of TAs that you can also join, and they'll be happy to help you at later times. So you have a map. Also, it's listed here in the office hours by day. So on Mondays you have Saiteja, Tuesdays you have all these folks. They're also ordered by time. These are all Eastern Standard Time. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sunday. I'm working on getting more TAs to support the students on Sundays, since that is the due date of most assignments. So let's see if I can convince a couple other TAs to cover Sundays. Yeah, so those are all the office hours. So last week we went over
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
So when I go to calendar, I see multiple events on Mondays. What are those?
Calendar.
Oh, yeah, it's on all the way to the left on your.
Calendar. To be honest, I've never bumped into the calendar. Let's see what's in there.
Oh, no, yeah, on my end, I see like 4 other web development Zoom events on that.
There might be. Okay, can I see what the students see? Student view. I forgot the calendar. So this is what the student should see. Is this what you see?
Yeah, that's what I see. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything.
Section 1. Oh, look at that. That's okay. These are meetings from last fall, and I guess they're still recurring. I guess I have to turn them off. I guess yeah, these are all for fall 2022. This is the one for us, right? This is CS5610.
Got it.
Section 06, and then spring 23. And this is also the one that's spring 2022. Yeah, this must be from earlier sections. I guess I'm pretty sure I made them recurring meetings, and I gave it a end date. I'm not quite sure why they're still here. I'll log into those other sections and turn off those meetings. They should not be listed here. The only one relevant for us is this one.
Okay, got it.
CS5610 SP 2023. That's it. Okay. But yeah,
Thank
thank you for letting me know.
Mhm.
All right, so yeah, so just to wrap up last week, we this one. Right, so last week we introduced the course. We went over the syllabus and all the office hours, and we talked about how to set up the environment. We talked about installing Node.js, creating our very first React application, which was a Twitter application, and then we deployed it to IntelliFi, and then we started talking about HTML a little bit, just the very beginning. So today what we're going to do is that we're going to continue officially talking about HTML. We'll talk about all the different elements, at least a very broad coverage of some of the more useful elements, and we'll be discussing many other elements as we progress throughout the semester. We're also going to talk about the second assignment, A2 HTML. This won't be due till the end of the month, okay? But nevertheless, I believe most of you might already be done with assignment 1. Assignment 1, we gave you a little more time than usual. We gave you 2 weeks, so it won't be due till January 22nd. So all last week, all this week, and should be completed by this Sunday. Now, I believe most of you might already be done with assignment 1, and that's great. But there are, this particular assignment, it's setting up a new environment, a new Node.js might collide with older versions that you might already have installed. It's different libraries that might behave differently for different operating systems. So this particular assignment, we gave you just a little longer, just to make sure that everybody was on board and everybody had their environment working. Let's see, the question in the chat. Yeah. So I'll work on removing those stragglers from previous semesters. Yeah, thank you. So hopefully most of you already have now a working environment, and some of you might have already started with assignment 2. So we're going to officially talk about that today. So yeah, so the project requirements, we'll go over that. We have A2 HTML, and we'll talk about HTML, the topic in general, right? So that's the plan for today. Any questions? I'm just going to bring up the syllabus to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Let's see. I always like to go back to the syllabus and keep me up to date, just to see where we've been and where we are and where we're going. Let's see. Yeah, so we set up the introduction, we introduced HTML last week, and we'll talk about HTML, tags, layout, web UIs, the projects, and we'll introduce assignment 2. And next week we'll do CSS. Okay, all right. So we are on target. All right, let's talk about HTML. So HTML, as we briefly might have discussed last week, is a technology that used to tell browsers how to render the screen, right? And it stands for Hypertext Markup Language, right? And I'm really big on acronyms, and so you'll certainly will get on the quiz and on exams questions about what different acronyms mean, right? And what does HTML mean? What does DOM mean? DOM. What does CSS mean? What does HTTP mean? What does URL mean? So make sure you know your acronyms very well. All right, that's kind of like a minimum knowledge of web development, right? English is not my first language, and I was heavily challenged at the beginning when everybody was using acronyms all over the place. AKA and ASAP, and so yeah. So make sure that you know your acronyms. So we'll talk about different tags. We'll talk about some inline tags and block tags and elements and nodes and whatnot, right? But basically, they are these sequence of character sequences that tell a browser how things should be rendered on the screen. Okay, if you just use plain text on an HTML document, the browser will just render plain text. It will not format anything on the screen, right? It'll just render word after word from left to right, from top to bottom, right? Everything using the same font, right? The same colors, backgrounds, foreground, not adding any extra spaces, any new tabs, new lines. All those would be ignored completely, right? So HTML documents, right, or hypertext markup language documents are just plain text documents. Just plain old ASCII text document that you can just edit with any editor, any text editor. But they are intended to be parsed by a browser, right, to lay out the screen and provide the main content of the screen. Okay, yeah, plain text. And there's tons of these tags. The HTML document will contain plain text. Most will be plain text, interspersed with these tags, with these character sequences that begin with a less than, then a tag name, and then it closes with a greater than, and then followed by perhaps some in-between text, just plain text, and then closing the tag with an equal name, but then a slash with it. Okay. And there's tons of these tags, right? And they do different things. For instance, this is the bold tag that makes things bold. Now these documents are, again, plain text, and they're saved in HTML documents. So let's play around with that. Let's just demo some of the things that you could do with HTML. Okay. So I think that's a great way of learning, is actually seeing it done, right? So last week we had created this React application, and we had created we had gone through some of the content and files in here, and we had discussed that the entry point of our website is this one. It's index.html, right? And in there we had talked about how all HTML documents have doc type at the beginning, and these pointy brackets that created a hierarchical data structure of these tags containing other tags that created this what we refer to as the DOM, that was a data structure that browsers use to determine how things were rendered on the screen, right? So let me just show you. For instance, here's a fairly complex screen, right? Canvas that has multiple columns. This column on the left side, kind of like a navigation sidebar, and then an internal sidebar here. So this is kind of like a sidebar that allows you to navigate across multiple courses and around the Canvas website. And then within a course, then you have an inner navigation column here, right? And then you have another column, like a big column here in the center, right? That is scrollable. But notice that the left sides don't scroll, but the center column does scroll, right? So there seems to be some kind of logical separation of how columns behave. We're going to learn how to do that. And then there's another column on the right-hand side that has kind of like generic sidebars that allow you to navigate different features, different aspects of this course. Okay. And so let's take a look at the DOM for this page, right? Now, the DOM can be seen by right-clicking on anywhere on the screen, right? Anywhere on the screen. Notice that there'll be an inspect section here, right? So, for instance, if I ever want to know how this quizzes was rendered, I can right-click and say inspect, and on the right-hand side appears kind of like a peek behind this curtain of what really happens behind the scenes, right? So this what's on the left side is what humans see, right? All pretty with blacks and reds, right? And grays and blues, right? And greens, all these colors and nicely padded, nicely white spaces and whatnot. But on the back, in the behind the scenes, what really is happening is that you have all these pointy brackets everywhere, right? This HTML, DOM, right? This document object model, this data structure that is collapsible. It looks like you have all these nodes that are within each other, right? That you can collapse and go all the way up to some root elements, right? This node at the top, this root that contains the entire document, right? So what we refer to this right-hand side, right? This data structure, we refer to it as the DOM, or document object model, right? And by document, we mean that this on the left side is some HTML document, presumably some HTML document, and then that is going to be parsed by the browser. And once it parses it, it generates this equivalent data structure in the memory of the browser, right? And then this tool allows you to kind of like, for developers, this is a tool for developers, right? That you can see how the document on the left side was parsed and interpreted by the browser, and it creates this data structure that represents the document on the left. Okay, so it's the model, it's the data, right? It's the object model for the document rendered on the left side, right? So this data structure on the right-hand side is, again, referred to as the DOM, document object model, and it has a particular structure, right? Which is a hierarchical tree with a root at the top, right? And then all these nodes and branches that connect to one another. And eventually reaching some leaves in this tree. And those leaves is what actually gets rendered. So all this piece of text here, right? This button, right? And this plus here and whatnot. These are all the leaves of this tree that contain the actual content, right? Now within the branches is what allows you to lay out or style, right, the surrounding elements, right, of the actual content. The content is the text, right? It's all this text, anything that can be consumed or read by humans, right? Or all these images. Those are at the leaves of this tree. But then above the tree, you have above these leaves, you have all these branches, and that's what allows you to refer to as containers of that content, right? That allows you to group together multiple contents into into logical sets, right? So all these presumably might live within a subset or branch of the tree. So for instance, if I click on this, right, it'll be the text, this text. See that? So notice that this resources here, notice that it's a opening span, right? The text resources, and then a closing span. And that's it. It doesn't contain anything within it. Okay, so this is a leaf, right? In this very, very complex tree. Now this span is surrounded. It's a child, right? It's inside this other span. See that? And as I go up the tree, you can see how the left side highlights larger and larger areas, right? So this leaf is referring to only that piece of text, right? As I go to its parent, notice that it on the left side, it highlights ever bigger and bigger and bigger portions of the tree, right? Of the UI. So if I go even further in this div, is surrounding this entire row, right? And if I go even further, up the tree, right, notice that I have this div, which seems to collect multiple branches and multiple nodes, right? So notice if I collapse this div, notice that I have this div here, just represents the heading here, whereas this lower div kind of like contains all these sub nodes down here, right? So if I open that up, presumably this has a UL here. UL is an unordered list that I can expand, and then you have several line items, and each line item represents each one of these rows here. See, line item, all these line items. See that? And you can open up each one of them, right? And then navigate further down into smaller and smaller and smaller regions until you reach, again, a leaf. Okay? I can expand it again. And each individual element is represented here. So here we've reached finally another leaf, this LI. So this is presumably some icon that represents this draggable element. So let me go further up. You can see the actual text is somewhere here. There's another icon. This is the text, right? And it represents the right-hand side, checkbox and ... Right? But the actual text is here, Syllabus CS5610, right? You can see that it contains each element, right? The text is probably right here. I can open that up, right? And finally, that's a hyperlink, right? And the actual text is somewhere in here. There it is. I believe that's the text. See that, right? Now this course teaches you how to create these data structures, right? First, today, we're going to learn how to create these data structures by hand, manually, actually typing them out deliberately, right? Eventually, as we progress throughout the course, we want to create algorithms, right, and logic that allows us to generate a lot of this content dynamically, right, following certain algorithms and rules and logic and data structures and things stored in a database, right, that might iterate perhaps over some array and then render all these LIs for us, right? Today we'll learn how to do this manually by hand, and then as we progress through JavaScript and whatnot and React.js and Node.js, blah, 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 we'll learn how to do this programmatically, okay? But for instance, here, if I select this LI and I hit delete, notice that it's removed, see that? So whatever manipulation whatever manipulation I do on the DOM, it's immediately reflected on the page, on the document rendered on the left side. So I can remove all these LI, right? I can remove this LI. I can go into this GitHub, right, and edit it, right? And this says GitHub, there it is, right? So, and I can change it to something, github.com, right, /Januzzi or something, right? So, so I do enter, and notice that any manipulation I do on this DOM element gets reflected immediately on the user interface, right? Now, what we want to learn how to do is do this programmatically, right? Not manually like I'm doing right now. So for everybody balking at this and says, "Oh my goodness, you just broke a canvas," right? This is all entirely temporary. So I can refresh, and this will be re-rendered. It'll go back to the server, fetching for the data, coming back, and then re-rendering this on the screen. So no permanent damage done here. So yeah, so we want to learn how to do this. So let's work on this, right? So let's try, right, to replicate some of this content here on the left side, and meanwhile learn about HTML. Okay. All right, yeah. So let's work on this. Let's take this as an example. Okay, let's take this left hand side as an example. All right. So what do we have here on the left side? So looks like we have on the left side we have a whole bunch of images, right? We have accounts, dashboard. So it's kind of like a list of things, right? And some of them are highlighted, and some of them have images. What about this on the following here? You have on the second row a column. You also have a list of things, right? And these seem to be all hyperlinks that take you somewhere. And then in the middle, you also have kind of the list of things. So you have like a list of lists, right? Where you have a list of modules, right? Modules, resource modules, required text modules, modules. And each one might have, so the list of modules, then each module has a subset of lists within it, okay? So let's try and replicate some of this and try to learn a little bit on how you would go about even building something like this, okay? So let's head over here and let's play around with recreating Canvas, right? So yeah, so remember we had said that under the public directory, the entry point to all the websites, right, are in the index.html, okay? And from here, presumably we give links that allows you to reach the rest of the website, the rest of the application. That's why it's called index.html. Yeah, very much like an index of a book, right? At the end of a book, right, in the back of the book, you have an index, and that index presumably is it's a very concise summary of the book that lists, where can you find the rest of the stuff in the book, right? And the way it does it, right, it gives you convenient, words that might have been that might appear somewhere on the book, and it tells you where do they appear on the and what page of the book does it appear. So the intent of the index here is that, right, to give you access to the rest of the website. Okay, that's the intent. That's why it's called index.html. So let's first create a directory to play around with Canvas. So let's call this Canvas. Okay, and in Canvas, it's a good practice, right, that any new directory like public has its own index. An index presumably gives you access to go into different places of the website. For instance, it might give you access to go to the Canvas, right, and navigate to different portions, right? Maybe about page, the profile page, the login page, the Canvas, whatever we're building, or Twitter, right? We're building Twitter. And it's a good practice to create different directories to break up, the complexity of a website, right? And put different things in there so that you can, deal with Twitter. All it's under the Twitter directory or Canvas or whatnot, right? Perhaps our website has a profile page, right? So we might put it under the profile directory, right? Or might have a login screen, right? So it depends how granular you want it to be, right? Maybe you want to put everything that has to do with users, like logging in and registering and profile, all under the same directory. Okay, that's a very common thing to do. Or if the profile itself is so complex, right, that it might make sense to have it all the profile under its own directory, right? It's all about you, how you want to manage complexity, right? So don't hold back or be afraid of creating directories as a means of breaking up a large application into smaller pieces, right? Always think about components, right? How can I break this up? So let's play around with Canvas. So just like we had index inside of public, it's also common that each directory might have its own index, right? So let's create here a new screen, like the entry point of our Canvas section, right, or screen or website. So let's create here an index.html, right? And there it is, right? Yes, I want to add it to Git. And let's notice that our IDE already knows that HTML documents have this structure, right? They all start with doc type. We have the opening HTML. And notice that it highlights it with the, as this being the root, right? Notice if I collapse it, everything goes away, right? Because it is it contains everything, right? All HTML documents contain two subchildren, right? The head tag and the body tag. As we might have mentioned last lecture, the head contains all the meta information about this website. We don't have any meta information other than maybe saying that this is the Canvas website, right? And this configures the the title appears as a window title or tab, right? At the tab. So that should appear as the tab or window when you open up in the browser. And then in the body, for now, let's start off with just saying a hello, right? Something like, welcome to Canvas. Okay, let's start with just that, right? All right, so how do we open this up? How do we run this and see if this even renders? So for now, right, not until we get to React.js in a couple of weeks. For now, you can just run these individual websites or these individual documents, HTML documents. You can render it, just open up in just a regular browser. Okay, and what you could do is just right-click on the index screen, right? You can say right-click and say run index.html. Okay, or right here on the, if you right-click anywhere on the document, you can just say run index.html. Okay, either way, this will open it up in your favorite browser, and it'll open up. On my case, it'll open up with Chrome. Make sense? Now, when you run it once, the very first time, it will create here at the top side. See that? It will create a run configuration right there. It is. See that index.html, which you can run it again by clicking this arrow. Okay, which is the same thing as just running it from here, right? But it's convenient to have it here so you can run it multiple times. Okay. All right. Notice it says "Welcome to Canvas," just like we would expect. Okay, so let's play around with a few things. So if we would be trying to replicate Canvas, we might have all these lists, right? We identify these lists and buttons and whatnot. So let's play around with some of this. Let's see. So it looks like this is a collapsible to collapse this this list here. Let's not do that just quite yet. So we'll do this list here. So let's do that. So let's have on the left side, we're going to call this maybe the Canvas Navigator, which allows you to navigate across the Canvas application. So we'll put this whole thing in its own little section, right? Subset section. So maybe now it's common to divide these logical regions of a web page into logical layouts of the screen, okay, in your HTML document. So and a generic way of dividing the content is to use divisors or divs, right? Divs are logical sections of a document, of HTML document, right? That everything that goes inside of a div presumably is all related to one thing, right? So we might say that this is, we'll use H2 to say that this is the Canvas Navigator, okay, which is this logical here, this list here, right? So we where is it? Here, let's put that here. We can follow along. Let's refresh. There is a Canvas Navigator. What does Canvas Navigator have? It has a kind of list of things, right? It has like an image, account, dashboard, blah 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 blah. So let's do that, right? So it's a list. Now there's a couple type of lists that for enumerating different things. And there is the ordered list, OL, okay, and there's also the unordered list, right? So let's just use the ordered list first. And like the name suggests, is what exactly you expect, right? It's a list, an enumerated list of things. So you can say LI here. Our first thing here would be presumably some northeastern hyperlink. So let's call it northeastern. Northeastern. Presumably, it might take you to some link to a northeastern. Let's see how that renders. Let's render that. There it is, northeastern. Notice the one there. See that? Because it's a enumerated list, right? So let's create another one. Let's see. We have account. So let's create an account here. So LI. Oops, not LI, not one. Sorry. There we go. Let's remove that. And so this is account. And we have several. So I'm just going to copy paste. So we have dashboard, so this dashboard, dashboard. We have courses, so courses. And we have calendar, so it's calendar. And we have inbox. Okay, and you get the idea, right? So if we refresh, notice that we have all the lists here. Now this obviously it doesn't look as pretty as this, right? But that's all with CSS. CSS, right? Cascading style sheet that we'll look at next week, right? And Bootstrap and all the styling libraries are meant to come back and make this look pretty. Okay, HTML is only for providing the actual content, right? Logically, right? How it fits together, that it's related to one another. But then come back later with CSS and make this look pretty. Okay, so we're not going to make it look pretty today. All right, we'll come back tomorrow. I mean next week, and with CSS and Bootstrap or Tailwind, whatnot, to make this look more presentable. Right now, we're using the default basic styling that comes out of the box with browsers have the default styling, right? Okay, so let's keep going. Certainly, we have a few other things. And notice also that this is a kind of like a heading, right? A big size, and you have a heading here. It's a little smaller, and we achieved that with H1 and H2, heading 1, heading 2, and there's 6 heading sizes, right? H1 is the biggest, and H6 is the smallest. So H2 is slightly smaller, H3 is slightly smaller, and so on and so forth. Okay, and we're following this structure here, right? We kind of are welcoming the overall page, right? Welcome to Canvas, and then subsections would use a smaller heading. Makes sense. Okay. So let's now play around with the second list here. This is home, modules, piazza, blah blah blah. So it's another list. Okay, so that allows us to talk about a different list. So and again, since this is another logical area separate from the Canvas Navigator, right? This is kind of like a course navigator. It allows you to navigate across the multiple sections of a course, right? So let's look at that. So let's create here another heading, and we'll say that this is a course navigator. Okay. So there's another type of list, and we're going to use an unordered list, right? So that this gives me a chance to introduce both types of lists. So ordered lists are for enumerated lists, 1, 2, 3, 4, and which can also be styled to use Roman numerals, use A, B, C, D, or lowercase a, B, C, D instead of just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But unordered lists, right? Unordered lists, so UL, like the name suggests, they're not ordered, meaning they're not enumerated, right? So you use the same LI meaning line item, allows you to list all the things, but they won't be enumerated. So instead, use bullets, right? So let's create a few things here. We have home, right? Well, let's create a whole bunch of these. So we have modules. So modules. We have piazza. Oops. Piazza. We have Zoom meeting. So Zoom meeting. Meetings. Assignments. And quizzes. Quizzes and grades. So quizzes, and grades. Maybe one more people. Okay. All right. Everybody good? All right. Yeah. So let's see the rendering. Obviously, again, this doesn't look anywhere as pretty as this, right? To make it look like this, we need style sheets, CSS, right? And for that, we'll talk about that next week. But nevertheless, again, HTML is just defining the content, how it's logically related to one another. The fact that this is going to be eventually rendered in a row with multiple columns, that's CSS, right? We could misuse HTML tables to achieve the same layout, right? But again, that would be a misuse of HTML table. Nevertheless, we might explore that a little bit So what about these resources? So these resources seems to be kind of like nested lists, right? Where you might have here a list of multiple modules, and then each module might have multiple lists of different links, right? About assignments or outside URLs, right? So let's so how would we go about that, right? So we could have another div here, and these are the modules, right? These are the modules, right? So we do maybe H2, and these are modules, and then the modules is just a list of lists, right? So this might be an unordered list that contains several modules. So this might be LI, and the modules would be maybe resources, right? Resources. So we might collapse all these. So these resources required, oops. So this might be required textbook. So this might be required textbook, textbook. We have office hours, the office hours, and we might have week 1. So this might be week 1. All right. And then each one might have each one might be a subset, right? A list within a list, right? So let's see how this renders so far. Right, so let's see, we have the modules, and then each module might have a sub module, or sub subset of within each. So we might do kind of like a list within a list, right? So this list item not only does it have resources, right? But maybe this might be kind of like its own heading, right? About resources, and should be smaller. Right? And then an unordered list within that list, right? So this is kind of a less nested list. So this might be an LI that lists the syllabus. So this might be syllabus. And let's paste a few things here. So this might be Piazza. Piazza. It might be project. This might be GitHub. Okay. Let's see how that renders. I go back and refresh. Notice that now we have again, see that we have a sub list of the syllabus and Piazza and whatnot, right? And same thing we could do with required textbook, office hours, and weeks and whatnot. Make sense? Everybody still with me? Okay. Let's see the question. What's the difference between div and span? Yeah, let's talk about that. So both of them are to logically group together its content. Okay, they are generic elements that don't add any boldness or italic or any look and feel. Okay, that what they do add is that the content is going to be treated either as a block element or an inline element, right? As a group, it's content, right? So that's a good segue onto what we mean by block elements and inline elements. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about block elements and inline elements. All right. So notice what welcome to Canvas does, right? And notice what these two words do. Okay, notice that these two words are flowing from left to right. Okay, and if I add more content, it's going to keep flowing from left to right. Okay, so let's for instance, let's create a hyperlink into the syllabus, and in the syllabus we'll play around with a couple of those things, right? So for instance, let's create a syllabus here. This will give me a chance to also introduce the hyperlink. So let's create another HTML document. We'll call it syllabus. Okay, and we'll create here. We'll say H1 syllabus. Okay. So, for instance, from within my index.html, I can create a hyperlink to go to the syllabus. Okay, and so we can wrap around the syllabus within our hypertext, like that. If I render, it's not. It doesn't. If I re-render, notice that nothing happened to syllabus. Okay, it looks exactly the same. But tags can be configured using attributes, right? Such as, for instance, href, right? Because hyperlink happens to have a behavior. It says that if you click whatever's inside my body, right, I will navigate to whatever my href says, right? So I will like to navigate to my syllabus page. See that? Syllabus.html. Okay, meaning that if I click on syllabus, it will replace this document with another document, whatever document I have here. Okay, so if I refresh, now syllabus is rendered blue and underlined. Okay, all right, so let's go and click on syllabus. There we go. It navigates to syllabus. Notice that we are no longer inside of our index page, right? We can go back, right? And there we are in the index.html. Okay, I can go forward, right? So the browser maintains a history, like a stack, right, of all the documents that it has visited, so that you can go move backwards and forwards in this stack, right? So now that we're in the syllabus, let's play around with a few things. Okay. So the syllabus, and I'm going to use my syllabus. I'm going to open it up here. So the syllabus has a few things. It has headings, right? A few headings, and other headings, and then some text. I'm just going to use this as an example in the syllabus, right? So I'm going to copy this heading, right? And in the syllabus, I'm going to paste that, web development, H1. And then I'll use this. I'll use this as my heading 2. Notice what headings do, right? What headings do is that they add vertical spacing. Okay, so if I'm here in the syllabus and I refresh, see that? It adds vertical spacing. It breaks up the screen vertically, right? That's what headings do, H1. So you can have lots of content here, right? You know, more content. And I refresh. The text is not broken, right? It stays, it flows from left to right, right, up until it reaches the end of the screen, and then it needs to wrap. That behavior of rendering from left to right, okay, up until you reach your limit, that's called inline. Right, rendering from left to right, from top to bottom, and then wrapping when there's no more space. Right, that behavior, right, is called rendering content inline. Okay. Instead, because we wrap the content in H1 and H2, it broke the content vertically. Right. Notice that CS5610. Even if I put it in the same line, here. Oops, sorry. Can you see the chat? Can you all see the chat?
Yes.
I'm moving it. You can all see it?
Oh, not on your screen.
Okay, good. That's good. I'm just gonna move it out of the way for myself. I can't see what I'm typing. So yeah, so notice that even though I put H1 and H2 right on the same line, when I render it, notice that it still breaks it up into 2 lines. See that? So that behavior is referred to as block. Okay, we say that H1 is a block element because it forces vertical spacing, right? It takes so H1, what it does, and H2 also, they take up the entire screen of whatever its a container is. It'll take up as much space as it can, all right, and force a vertical break, and push everything down. So that's what H1 is doing. H1 says, well, what I'm going to do even if you're in the same line, well, I'm going to take up the entire width of the screen, and whatever is on my right-hand side, well, is going to have to move over and be pushed down. It creates a vertical spacing. Make sense? So let's do another one. So for instance, let's create this course goals, and let's put it here, and say maybe this is H3. So obviously H3 is also going to be vertical spacing. There it is, course goals. And then we have a paragraph. Let's grab this paragraph here. So paragraph also behaves as a block element, right? These are all block elements, right? Some elements are not block elements. So we'll see a few in a minute. So if I refresh, this is my paragraph, right? So for instance, I could take the web technologies, right, and make that web development technology, and I want to maybe change its look and feel, right? I can say maybe let's break this up a little bit. Okay, I can create a bold here. See that? So notice that up to this point, any use of tags has created a vertical spacing break, right? So you might say, if I do this, also it'll break it, right? Well, it won't, okay? Because the B tag is not a block element. All these are block elements: H1, H2, H3, P, paragraph. They all break the content vertically, but B does not. Bold does not. So if I refresh, notice that this becomes bold, but it stays in line with the rest of the content. So we say that the B tag is an inline element, as opposed to H1 is a block element. Everybody good? All right. So now H1, H2, H3, paragraph, these are block elements that also add some styling. Not only do they break up the screen vertically, but they also add some styling, right? H1 makes the text much bolder and bigger, right? H2, also, but it's a little smaller. H3, paragraph, what it does, it adds a little bit of space above and below, okay? But what if you want to break up the screen as a block element, but don't add any additional styling? Well, that's where div comes in. Div breaks up the content vertically. It is a block element, meaning it takes up the entire width, the width of the screen. It pushes everything off vertically, but it doesn't add any additional styling. No bolds, no extra padding at the top, no margins, no nothing, right? So for instance, if I want to keep adding more content, like say lecture. Let's put lecture here. And let me, so if I do that and I refresh it, all right, there it is, my lecture. So notice that it breaks it up, but you might say, well, that's because you had the paragraph above it. Obviously, that breaks up things, right? So this is not really broken up, but actually it is. So for instance, let me just add another one just to illustrate. Let's add assignments here, right? And let's add another div. And I paste it in there, right? So if I refresh, right, notice that this appears below this, right? And you might say, well, obviously it appears below it because you put it on below it, right? Well, notice if I remove these divs, meaning they all are in the same div logically, right? If I notice what's going to happen is that now this the assignment is going to continue right here. It's going to be part of the same line because text just wants to be in line, right? But because I had added a div, it broke it up. But because now I removed the divs, it's going to behave inline. So this is just going to fall right here. Let me refresh and see. See that? Right? They're all now part of the same div, right? But because I have two divs, right? I'm breaking it up vertically. Everybody good? Refresh. Okay. All right. So that's what div does. Divs allows you to logically, group things vertically. Okay, so what does span do? So span doesn't do anything. Span, let me put span around something, right? What it does is that it logically grabs and groups together elements like text or content. So logically here, I have logically grouped together this piece of content, but like div, it doesn't add any additional styling. So span is the equivalent of div, but div is a block element, so it'll add vertical spacing, but span won't add vertical spacing because it's an inline grouping element. It groups together the content, but it doesn't add any more spacing. So it doesn't really do anything, right? So if I refresh, notice that it doesn't do anything to focus on developing practical blah, 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 right? Focus on developing practical, doesn't do anything, see that? Right, so some might say, well, what's the point? Why can you group something, but then you can't do anything with it? Well, it's because you can style it. I can apply a class, right? I can apply a style, right? I can say that the background color is red. So now this is being applied to only those 4 or those 5 elements, right? I group them together, and I can now treat them as if they were one thing, right? I can change its foreground color, I can change its background color, right? I can say color white, right, and refresh it, and there it is. Okay, to highlight something. But then later on, when we use CSS or we use JavaScript, right, we're going to be able to refer to that piece of content with the span, right, and programmatically do something to it together or style it with CSS and whatnot, right? So that's the point. So divs and spans are for grouping things logically. Divs break up things vertically. Span doesn't. Span is inline, keeps the inline, but it allows you to refer to a collection of things logically together, so you can apply a common style or common logic. Make sense? All right. All right. Yeah. So let's go back. We're here in the syllabus. So notice that I can navigate to the syllabus, but here to navigate back, I'm using the back button, right? So ideally, we would make this explicit instead of relying on the browser giving me navigation capabilities. Ideally, we would add maybe a hyperlink in the syllabus so that we can go back, right? So maybe we put here at the top, maybe like a back button, right, with a hyperlink that allows me to go back, right? And here we can specify where do we want to go back. We want to go back to the index page. Okay? So if I'm here and I refresh, there's my back button, and I click on back, and it takes me to the index. So now I can go back and forth. Everybody good? All right, awesome. All right, so yeah, we've seen hyperlinks, headings, paragraphs, lists. Let's look at a couple of other things. For instance, tables. Tables is also a very useful tag. So let's use grades. Let's render, for instance. Let's render, for instance, the grades. The grades, you have a list of assignments and students, right? So students listed on the left side. You have the assignments at the top, and then each column presumably has everything's of the same data type, right? Everything refers to assignment 1, right? And then the second column refers to all assignment 2s, and that was the initial intent of the table, right? Well, it still is. That is the proper use of tables, okay? And that should be the proper use of tables. You should, going forward. But we'll see how folks have misused tables, right, historically, and we'll see that in a minute. So let's quickly try to reproduce some of this. So it's a table. So let's create a page called gradebook, right? So let's create that. We'll call this gradebook. So HTML says it might be gradebook.html. and we'll have an H1, and we'll call this gradebook. Okay, so let's go back to the index page, and let's create a hyperlink to the gradebook. So grades, and we'll add some space here. Let's create a hyperlink that we can go to gradebook. That okay. There we go. So let's see, if I refresh here, I have the grades here. If I click on grades, it goes to gradebook. And like we did earlier for the syllabus, it'll be good to have a back button. So I'll copy that and put it also at the top of my gradebook. So I should always be able to go back to my main content, right? So if I refresh, I can always click on grade back, grades back, perfect. So within gradebooks, let's create this table. So the table is created using the table tab. So let's do that. So we can use a table. There it is. And the table has several children. It has the sub tags that represents multiple sections of the table. You have the headings, right? You have the main content, which has all the data, and then you have a footer at the bottom, right? Very much like you have here. You have headings at the top, see that? Right? Then the main content that has presumably all the data, and then at the bottom, presumably you might have like averages or totals or things that might summarize all the data, maybe the averages of all the assignments, all the totals, and blah blah blah, right? So yes, let's implement some of this. So let's create a couple students. Let's create a couple columns. So let's first declare the 3 sections. So we have the headings, T head, right? Then you have the main content, which is the T body that has the main data, and then you have the T footer, T foot. Okay. Now in the head, T head, you have at least one row that represents the content, right? The names of these things, right? So for instance, A1, A2, A3, right? So, and then the student name. So let's do that. Let's create a table row that contains all the headings, right? And the first heading is student name. So the first heading is TH. This is name, maybe just like that, name. And several headings. We have A1. So let's put A1. A1 setup. A2 HTML. So A2 HTML. A3 CSS. So A3 CSS. A4 bootstrap. So A4 bootstrap. Okay. So let's see how this renders. Let's go back here and refresh. And there they are. So notice that these are the headings of the table. It doesn't look much like a table, but yeah, this is a table. It might help if we make a border around this so that it looks more like a table. Now, normally we would use CSS to change the look and feel of the table, but we don't have CSS just yet. So instead, the table has an optional attribute called border, right? Where we can specify the size of the border. Notice it's deprecated. So notice that the browser's telling me, hey, don't use this because it's not the proper thing to do. And that's fine, right? We would not actually do this, right? In real life. We would use CSS to style this, right? If we really had to style it. But for now, we'll change it to 1. So we're changing it to that we want at least, a border of size 1. Also notice that it's all squished up to the left side. It just, it takes up whatever size the content forces it to be, right? So if I had more headings, obviously this would expand to the right. And if each heading is bigger, right, it just would take more space, okay? All right, so let's see. In the table body is where we have rows of data, right? So this is the table row, and here we have the data under each one of the columns or the headings, right? So the first heading is name. So that means that the first column of the data should have a name, right? So this might be TD. So TD stands for table data, right? So the data, this would be under, right, the column name, right? So for instance, it might say Alice, okay? And then in the same row, right? In the same row, the first one column, so Alice is under name. And then for A1, Alice is a great student. And so she got 100% for assignment 1, right? She maybe struggled a little bit in assignment 2, right? She aced the CSS, right? And she struggled a little bit in Bootstrap, right? So if we go back and re-render, right, notice that indeed we have the content in there, 100%, 95, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And let's create just a few more. And I'm just going to copy this table row, and I'm just going to paste it here a few times, right, for a couple of students. So we have Alice. Here we might have Bob. Bob is not such a great student, so you got an 87 over here, and you got a 98 over here, and this is A, B, C. So Charlie. Charlie is also very good. He aced every single assignment. And finally, we have A, B, C, D. So we have Dan here, and he's as good as Alice. So we refresh. Notice that we have Alice, Bob, Charlie, and Dan. Make sense? All right, excellent. Yeah. So in the table row, right, for the table body, it's common to have multiple rows, right? One per record, right, that you want to display. Okay. It's less common to have multiple rows in the heading or in the footer, right? It's very common to just have one row in the heading, but you can have more than one. You can have another row, right, in the heading, right? So for instance, I want another row in the heading. Okay. Maybe I want to display maybe this here. So it says out of 100. See that? Out of 100, out of 100, blah, 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 blah. Maybe I want to display that under there. Right? So I could do that. I could say TD or TH, sorry, is heading. So the name actually doesn't have underneath something. So it looks like this kind of like spans of, if I have two rows, this particular cell, right, or heading seems to span multiple rows, right? Whereas this seems to have individual rows, right? So these are two rows, but this is kind of like two rows, but it spans both rows, right? So this name, I might say that it spans. See, there's two spans. You can span across multiple columns, or you can span across multiple rows. So name, we want to span across two rows. So we're going to say two. Span. So that means that this name is going to show up also in the second row, right? That means that this TH, right, it's actually going to be under A1. See that? Not under name, right? Because the first TH is already taken by the first row. So this might say, out of 100, multiple times, right? So I might say 4 times, right? Because there's 4 and there's 4, right? So the first one is taken up by this one, right? So let's refresh this, refresh. There it is. See that? So out of 100, blah, blah, blah. Everybody good? All right. Excellent. So just like there's spans across multiple rows, there's also spans across multiple columns, right? But I'll let you play with that. Let's look at the footer. In the footer, we also can have multiple rows, right? So we have footer. We might have one row, right, that displays averages, right? So we have TD, and this might be averages. So names have no averages. So I'm not even gonna put anything there. So that's under name. And then I have 4 here. So this might be, I'm very bad at math. So I'm going to go with 98% is the average. Actually, no, the first one might be just says averages. Yeah. This is describing the content in that row, right? These are the averages. So 98 for assignment 1, 90, 99 for assignment 2, 95 for assignment 3, right? And 97 for assignment 4. Right? So it's right. So if we refresh, there we go, right? So we have averages, right, for the table footer, and you might have also, you know, averages. We might have mean, right, the mean, and then you might have, I don't know, max, right, max, and then maybe another one, minimum. So these might be, you know, aggregate values, right, that tell you about, you know, several statistics about the actual grades, but that's up to you, right, what you want to do. Anyway, so those are tables. Those are tables used properly. That's what this is what tables are meant for. Okay. But people have misused tables improperly, right? As follows. For instance, people have used it for laying out things because you see this here, and we want to lay out this content in multiple columns, yeah? And there is no native support for that in HTML. Right? HTML doesn't have, you know, dedicated elements or tags for rendering things in columns. Right? And it's a very common way of laying out content, especially, you know, if you're, you know, printing material like, you know, articles in a magazine or newspapers, right? Or, you know, it just looks neater. Right? Otherwise everything would just expand the entire width of the screen, right? And so we could use tables for this, right? For laying this out. It's not the proper use of tables, and you should avoid it. Later on next week, we will teach you how to use instead CSS. The proper way of laying out things in columns, right, or in a grid, is to use CSS or libraries such as Bootstrap or Tailwind and whatnot. Okay, so that we'll teach you next week. But just to let you show how to not do this. Okay, I'm going to do it, but you don't do it. All right. I'm going to show you how not to do this. Is what we could do here is go back to our index, right? And for instance, this is the Canvas Navigator, this is the Course Navigator, these are the modules, and we want these all to be in separate columns, right? So what we could do is create a table here, right? And we don't need headings, we only need the body, right? And we just need one row that has multiple columns, right? So we have one row that has multiple columns, right? So the first one, second, and third, right? So these are going to be 3 columns. So this is going to be the Course Navigator. Course Navigator is going to go here. This is going to be our, no, sorry, his Canvas. The Navigator, this is going to be our Course Navigator. And this is going to be our modules, right? Okay, so if I refresh, there they are, right? Canvas Navigator, Course Navigator, and modules. Just so that we know what we're doing, we're going to put a border, oops, in the table. Sorry, in the table we're going to say border 1, just so that we can see that this is indeed a table. We can also take up the whole screen. You can say that the width is 100%. Again, you would do this with CSS, not with these attributes, right? So meaning this is going to take the entire width of the screen, okay? And now we can just copy this entire content and just move it in here, okay? And this whole thing and move it in there, and so on and so forth, right? And then the modules, move it in there. Okay, so let's do that. So for instance, let's grab this whole thing. Just gonna move this. I'm gonna do cut, right? And I'm gonna move it into Canvas Navigator. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the Course Navigator. I'm gonna move it in there. And then the modules, I'm gonna move it in there. Okay. All right, so let's see what that does. Let's re-render. There it is, right? So we moved everything in there. Now it's all in one row and multiple columns. So it's a little bit closer to what we have here. Obviously, nowhere near as pretty as what this looks like, but the layout starts to look similar. One thing is, for instance, that all this content seems to be kind of like at the top, right? Whereas this by default, it wants the content to be centered in the middle of the row, right? So equal distance from here to the top, and then from the bottom, same distance. So same thing here. Meaning we want to align this at the top of the table, right? So the table has things like that. So we have align, right? So we have vertical align, right? And so we have a top. Oh wait, maybe. No, actually, no. This might be at the. This might be at the table data, the column level. There it is. So this aligns at the top, right? I might do the same thing here. Again, you would use CSS, right? And libraries to do this, right? You would not do this inside of HTML. But there it is, right? You can also, style the width of these elements. So you might say that the width of this particular left-hand side, it might be only 20% of the whole screen. So we're making it, less wider, right? So we might even smaller, maybe 15%. Okay, and then this one too might be the width, also 15%. Right, and the module's taking up most of the width, right? Taking whatever's left. So this together is 30%, and then the modules is the remaining 70% of the width of the screen. Okay. All right. Yeah. So this was very common early on when HTML just came out. In the early 90s, and it just took off, and everybody was creating content, right? But as we learn to do things better, and we introduce CSS, a dedicated language, right, to make things pretty, we started abandoning this way, this misuse of HTML. Although today, unfortunately, it's still misused quite a bit, it should be your kind of like your last resort, right? If you really can't figure out how to do it with CSS, right? Your last resort should be to use tables for this kind of thing, right? I'm not gonna judge you. I'd rather you try to struggle through getting this done with CSS. But if you are so frustrated, then sure. Okay, so one last thing that I'd like to take a look at is the use of forms, right? For forms. So for instance, one of the things that we would like to be able to do is maybe, for instance, be able to look at our profile. And if I go to my account, I can look at my profile and maybe edit my profile, where I can change my my name, title, contact, biography, link, and whatnot, right? So let's try and reproduce this. So for instance, in the account, right? Let's navigate to profile, right? So let's do that. So here in the div here, we have account, right? And we're going to navigate to account here. We'll say HTML, let's say account.html, and this will be maybe h1, and this says account. And let's navigate from account to that new page that I just created, right? So this might be A, and this is account, and this is href. I want to navigate to account. There we go. Right, so if I refresh, it's my account. If I click on that, there's my account. And here I'm going to, change my account information, right? I'm not doing it quite the way they did it. They separated into profile, file, settings, yada yada yada. I'm just going to do this screen here. Okay. So I might have multiple fields in the account. So let's make the account where I can use change my name. I have a text area where I can type something, quite a few things. I can put my, my favorite, links that points to different resources, and, things that are private to me, and, my favorite colors, my favorite movie genre, right? And so let's I'll show you just a few of these, right? So for instance, if it's just if it's a simple input field, we can use the input text, right? So let's do that. So let's say here, name, right, and have an input field. So the input allows us to type text, right? Let's see how it renders. So if I go here and refresh, there it is. So name and the input field. Okay, notice that the input field, even though it's its own line, right, it rendered right after the name. See that? Right, that means that input fields behave as inline, right? They are not block elements, right? They follow the flow of the text from left to right, from top to bottom, right? If you wanna force a wrap, you'll have to put it inside of its own div, okay? Or use one of the line break tags to do that. For instance, we might put here a break, BR, right? Maybe in a new line, which does a literal line break, right? Breaks the line. So it creates so break is forces a block behavior, okay? So name is where I might be able to type. So there it is. I can just type any piece of text. I might give folks an idea of what I want them to type. So I can give them a placeholder where I can give them an example of what I'm expecting them to type. So I might say, John, or maybe John Doe. So I'm expecting them to type a text. So it's an example of what I'm expecting them to type. See, so notice that it renders in light gray as meaning that it's not actual text, right? So if I click on it, the hint is still there. Not until I start typing, right, it disappears. And when I back up, right, it reappears when there's nothing in it. So it appears only when it's empty, right? As I start typing, it goes away, right? Another way of giving you an example or some explanation of what it is that I'm expecting you is to use a tooltip, right? For instance, I could hover over the input text, right, and it could give me a hint, right? And so, for instance, we can use the title. Title allows me to type text that explains a little bit what's going on only when you hover over it. So, please enter your name or something. Okay. So if I refresh, now if I hover, notice it appears this little blurb, right? That give you a little more explanation of what you're expecting. And obviously, there's always the label, and the label here kind of tells me what you're expecting to type, obviously, right? What else? Also, it might be that I'm editing here a piece of text that already exists, right? Meaning, if I have logged in, obviously this would be already pre-populated with data that I might have gotten from the database, right, or from my actual account, and it would have my data already there, right? So to do that, we can use the value. Value initializes this, puts a default value in this input field, so that pre-populated. So this might say Ziada with the actual text, perhaps read from the database, right? So let's refresh, and indeed now the data is there, which I can type, right? Again, I can edit it. But notice if I remove everything, notice that the hint comes back, the placeholder comes back, right? If I refresh, right, it repopulates. The hint's still there. If I hover, the text, the tooltip reappears. Okay. All right, notice that this line is getting very long, right? So it's getting harder and harder to read. So it's a best practice to not put all this stuff in one line, right? It makes it really, really hard to read. So the best practice is to break this up into individual lines, right? To break it up. Each attribute in its own line, right? And this tag open like that, right? Just like if you're programming, right? Like any other program, you would break up your logic into individual lines of code. Right? So same thing here. What else? So one thing that we might want to do is that if you're clicking on it, obviously if you click on the input field, notice that it takes focus. The cursor appears inside of the input field, right? That's referred to as the input text getting focus, right? Notice that if I click on the label, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens to the label. Right now, they are completely independent of each other, right? Other than, being next to each other, right? There's really no relationship between these two things, the input field and the label, right? But we could relate them. We could relate them by giving the input field a unique identifier. Let's say this username or username. Let's say username. Now this ID just uniquely identifies this element, and any element can have an ID. Right? For instance, I could give this H1 an ID as well. You can say ID, right? And this is a title, the title. Okay. This allows me to uniquely identify each one of the elements, right? And they have to be uniquely identified within the same page. So for instance, I can't use user account or username. Notice that the browser, my IDE complaint says, no, these have to be uniquely identified. Right? Now, usually we don't need to use IDs whatsoever. I'm only using the ID here because I want to relate, right, this name with this input field. I'm going to relate them. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we relate them? Well, the way to relate them is to wrap the name inside of a label tag. Right, label tag. Notice that if I come back and refresh, nothing really happens. Right, it's just like span, right? It allows you to add behaviors to it, right, or somehow grab it and then do something with it. But it doesn't change the way it looks. Yeah, it doesn't change the look and feel. Right. What this allows me to do now is say something about this name. Right? I'm saying that this is the label. This text here is the label I want to associate for this input field. I'm going to say that this label is for this input field, right? And the way we say that is using the for. Okay. And notice that for already knows that you want to relate this label with something that has a unique identifier. Right now, the only thing that has a unique identifier is this input field. See that? Right. So it offers me, okay, hey, do you want to relate it to that field that has a unique identifier username? And say, yep, I'm going to select it. Now, this label and this input field are bound, right? They know about each other. And now, notice if I refresh, it looks the same. Nothing has happened, right? If I click on the input field, I still get the focus. But now, if I click on the label, notice what happens. See that? The input field gets the focus. See that? Right? And what that allows me to do is to increase the overall clickable area of this text field, right? It's I mean, right now it doesn't matter much, right? It's not a big deal, but it's very big deal in smaller screens, like a phone or a tablet, and where things might be smaller and harder to hit, especially if you're talking about smaller input fields like a radio button or checkbox, right? They're really, really tiny. It helps to provide a larger clickable area, right? So let's do a couple more. So for instance, let's do a bio. So we'll do a label. We'll do a text area. So text area allows us to create a larger text place for to type a lot of information, right? Now notice that input uses a slash greater than. See that? All the other tags like label and H1 have had a body, right? Something inside of an opening tag and a closing tag. See that? Not the input field. The input field has no body. It has no body, right? notice that it closes right here, slash. See that? Slash, and then greater than. There's no body, so it's not grabbing any text, right? The text is in the attributes, right? Text area is different. Text area does have an opening and a closing tag, right? And what it renders, what you added, is what you put in here. Right? So, for instance, if you refresh, there's my text area. It behaves like an inline, right? So it wants to render right next to the input field. Okay. So we'll need to add a break. Let's add a break. Right. So in a new line, it may be in its own label. So I'm going to copy this label. Okay. And we'll change the label to be something else. This is bio. And the 4 will be for bio. That means that this is, notice that it's saying, I don't see any ID called bio. Well, let's add an ID here, bio. There it is, bio. Okay, now they're related, right? So meaning that if I have the label, if I click on bio, notice that it takes the text area, gives me the focus, right? So yeah, so let's put a break here too. A break right there. There we go. And notice that this is the text area is resizable. I can make it bigger. I can also provide a default size. I can say that the rows, how many rows I want, right? Rows, I want 10 rows. If I refresh, right, it makes it much taller. And I might want several columns. I want 20 columns, right? So I guess not. I can make 40 columns. It was already 20 columns. There it is. Now it's wider, right? You have the same labels, the same placeholders, and biography. I like to ski or something, right? As an example placeholder, right, of what I'm expecting you to type. I like to ski and play Lego. Okay, so this is an example of what we might expect you to type in there. Now the value, the default value in input fields, you provide it with a value attribute. Here you don't, right? You provide it inside the body of the text area. So let's put this in separate lines of code, right? So that we can read this better. And then the text area will add here the actual text. It says Northeastern professor teaching web dev. Okay, so let's refresh, and there it is. So that's the text, the text, and then I can edit it, whatever. Make sense, everybody? All right. Okay. Yeah. So let's keep going. So a few other things. Let's break this again. Break here, and let's create another label here. And whether you're married or not. So married, this might be within my private area that folks can't see or something, right? And this might be a break. And so this married could be answered in several ways, right? I could put an input field, right, where you where you have a value of yes, no, like yes, right, something like that. A better way would be for us to restrict the options, right? Maybe either with radio buttons, or maybe a drop down, right? So that we can't misspell yes, no, or something like that, right? And so instead of saying yes or no, right, we might instead use a radio button, right, where we're either yes, married, or no, married, right? So we provide two radio buttons, right? So this might be a radio button. So type allows us to specify multiple types of input fields. By default, notice that this input field, we never specify the type. See that, right? So by default, the default type is a simple text area, right? is as if we would have said type equal text. See that? Right? If I refresh, that's what that is. Right? That's the default. So if I don't say anything, is type text. But if I want other things, I need to select other things, right? So for instance, if I want a radio button, I can say radio. Okay, and if I refresh, right, notice that indeed I have a radio button that I can click and make selected. Right? And I might put maybe a yes next to it, or a no, something like that. Yes, no. All right. Now these yes, no, presumably, notice if I click they get selected. If I click on no, notice that they're both selected, and that makes no sense. You can't be both yes married or no married, right? So these need to be mutually exclusive. Somehow they need to know that they are related to one another. And if you have 20 radio buttons, you need to know which radio buttons are grouped with other radio buttons. So we need to group these together so that they are mutually exclusive, so that if you select one, it unselects the other, right? So let's do that. The way we do that to group them is by using the attribute name. Name, if you use the same name for both radio buttons, the browser will know that they are related to one another, right? So if I use the name Mary, and then I come here, right, and I say married as well, now it knows that these two are related to one another and they're mutually exclusive. So if I go back and I refresh, if I click on the radio button, right, notice that indeed now one selects and the other one unselects. Make sense? Okay. Now this yes, now we had mentioned earlier, right, that clicking on radio buttons, especially on smaller screens, is fairly challenging. So ideally, we could do the same thing we did for the name of the bio, that if I click on the label, right, the radio buttons also are selected, right? So we could use the label. We could use the label. We could say label. We can give the input field an ID. So this would be ID married, no, yes. And this could be ID married, no. Okay. So I could say this yes here. I could say I can use the label, say label, and yes. And I can say that this label is for married yes. So that now if I click on yes, notice that the radio buttons get selected. See that? But not no. So I could do the same thing for the no. I can do the same thing for the no, or right, I could use another strategy. I could not even use an ID, and instead just wrap this whole thing in a label. Now the text is part of the input field, this one thing, right? So if I refresh, I notice that I can click on the no, right? I'm clicking on the label, and it selects the input field inside the body of the label, right? So there's two ways of doing it. Yes, no, right? You can select which one you want. Okay. So an alternative way of doing this, right, of using radio buttons, I could have instead used something like let's do a break here, right? I could have done something like label marital status. I could have done, right, instead of doing that. Marital, can't spell, status. I could have maybe doing a drop down, right, where you can select one of the options, right? So I could use a select tag that allows me to list multiple options, right? So for instance, I can say that the options are that I'm married, right? I am single, right? I am a widow, right? Okay. Something like that. So if I refresh, notice that indeed that is a drop down where I can select the options, right? And also I would add maybe a break here, so I can select from here. Right? So that's an option, yeah, drop down. Now, a good practice is to apply a value to this, so that this is value that gets sent over to the server using tokens that might be from some dictionary, that is a curated dictionary, so that otherwise you'd be sending the text that is inside of the options. So a good practice is to put here the actual text that would be sent over and stored in a database, for instance, right? It would be grabbed from the value. This might be single widow. Okay. It doesn't change the look and feel, right? What else? Other things that we might want to put in here is the just like we had radio buttons, we might have check boxes, right? That allows you to select multiple options, right? So for instance, you might say, you know, you might have a label here, and for instance, you might say, you know, the courses that you're teaching or something, right? Courses teaching this semester or something. I don't know. And so there might be multiple ones, right, from where you can select from a list, right? So this could be, we use input of type checkbox, right? That allows you to select multiple options. You know, I'm teaching CS5550. Okay, let's create several input checkboxes. CS4550, you know, 5610, 5200, you know, 3200, 5500. Okay. And so if I refresh, notice I have all those radio buttons, right? I mean, checkboxes that I can select each one of them, right? Let's add breaks to each one of these. So I add a break maybe at the end of these. There they are. Breaks there. And also it'd be nice to, if we can click on the text, right? So we can use the same strategy that we had earlier. We can have a label either surrounding the radio button or the checkbox, or have a label and then an ID with a 4, right? So we could use either strategy. I'm going to be lazy, and I'm just going to wrap this inside a label like this. So I'm just going to put it here, label, 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 and then just wrap each one of these up in front. Okay, so if I refresh, now I can click on the text, right? It makes it so much easier, right, for folks to interact with this, right? Other fields of interest might be things such as being able to type my email. So this might be my email, where I have an input of type email. So type email. And you can, again, you can put a placeholder, you can put a default value, obviously, right? And so email. And so email allows you to verify and validate, right, that certain characters are there, like the @ sign, and that you have a domain and you have a .com or whatnot, right? So that's useful for validating. Also useful because, especially on phones and tablets, you know, when you click on them on the email, the email keyboard pops up. Okay, that has already the correct characters. You know, the @ sign, the .com. You can select the the extension and whatnot. You also have numbers, right? So for instance, you might say years teaching or something. I don't know, years teaching. So that might be a number. Okay, and number. Notice that it doesn't allow you to type characters, right? Only numeric values. So no alpha, you know, A through Z or anything like that, right? None numeric values. So only numbers, you know, which is nice, right? Same thing. if this is going on a phone or a tablet, and you click on this, right, it'll pop up the correct keyboard, right? So you can actually type only the numbers, right? Also, it automatically gives you this up and down, right? You can specify also a minimum, right? That it can only be a minimum of 100 and maybe a maximum of 1,000, say, right? That means that you're not allowed to have anything outside that. So, for instance, you can type 100, right? But you can't go below. You can't go below. See that? So you're not allowed to type 99, 98, or anything like that. Or if you go all the way to 987, right? That's fine. You can go up, but you can't go above 1,000. So it's nice for some validation. You also have a telephone, telephone, phone number, or phone. So this is tel. And you can give it. So this validates that the only telephone characters are available. You have parentheses plus all the numbers. And it's also convenient. Again, if it's on a phone, right? And you start editing the telephone, it pops up the telephone keypad, right? So that you can start typing a telephone, which is nice. Right? It's very convenient, especially when your UI is on a telephone. Right? And finally, another useful is the date, right? So for instance, date of birth, right? This is a type date, and this allows you to use one of their widgets, right, where you can select the date. It defaults to today's date, and the nice thing is that this renders differently from different browsers. It uses the correct widgets for the different phones or tablets, right? So on Android, it'll pop up the Android date picker. On iOS, it'll pop up the iOS date picker, right? And you can specify an actual date. So to start off, you said the value is 2023, and dash the month, right? Dash the day. So you can say today, say it's the 17th, tomorrow, right? So if I refresh, notice that it defaults to that date. See that? And when you get the date picker, notice that it already highlights the date that you selected, 17, right? You can put a minimum, meaning I don't allow dates less than a particular date. So you say nothing below 01 10. Okay, and then if you refresh and you highlight, notice that it grays out so that you can't pick, right, dates in the past or something, right, or dates in the future. You might provide a maximum, right? You could say, well, you can't give me a date higher than a particular date. Right? So you say max 2023 01 23 or something, right? So next week or at the end of this weekend, right? So if I select, notice that it grays out anything after 23, so you can't select, and nothing before the 10th, right? So yeah, so there's some really powerful behaviors that you can select. Now there's the format of the date is also standard, right? So the way you pick out and you refer to actual dates is by a specific format of 4 digits for the year, dash 2 digits for the month, dash, and then 2 digits for the day. Now for international browsers, if this is being consumed in other countries, the format that is rendered here, it will be specific to that country or to that region, right? So in Europe, right, it will actually, I think it'll be day, month, year, right? As opposed to here in the US is month, day, year, right? And in different regions of the world, right, in India or China, Japan, or other Asian countries, it'll render using the local regional format, right, for that particular, wherever this page is being consumed, right? But whatever browser is being used using this page at that particular region. But nevertheless, the widget picker will be will be for that particular region, right? Localized. But nevertheless, the day, the standard day, right? It will always be 4 digits for the year, dash 2 digits for the month, and then dash 2 digits for the day. Okay. All right. Let's see. Any questions? Let's see. Oh, of course, we have buttons. We have other buttons. We have the buttons where you can submit. Maybe you can cancel. You have buttons that actually allow you to, invoke an action, right? To some function that needs to run, right, or submit this to the server for consumption. All right. All right. Any questions? All right, folks. I think I'm gonna leave it here. Now, So actually, no, sorry. I do want to take a look at the assignment. Let me look at the assignment. Yes, I'm sorry. Let me go to the assignment. Let's take a look at the assignment here. Assignment 2. So assignment 2, which is not due till the end of the month, but at least I just want you to make you aware of it. At least the structure of all assignments is going to follow this structure, and I want you to be aware of it. Okay. So this assignment is for HTML. Okay. And all assignments are going to have 3 parts. Right? The first part of all assignments is labs, right? And the lab asks you to practice several skills, right, that you're going to learn about HTML, right? You're going to learn about what we did today, right? About paragraphs, headings, right? Learning about styling things with lists, ordered lists, unordered lists, right? So you'll practice a lot of what we talked about today, okay, on your own. About learning how to create tables like we did today, like averages and whatnot, right? And a lot of it is you copying and pasting this content, right, in your own web pages, right? How to do images, okay? How to do forms like text areas, right? And input fields and drop downs and dates, right? Much of what we did today, but you're gonna practice it on your own. Buttons, drop downs, right? We talked about that today. Radio buttons, check boxes, anchors to navigate, right? So once you practice that, right? That's the first section, the first part of the assignment. And all assignments are going to have that, right? Assignment 2, 3, 4, 5 are going to ask you to just learn about certain skills, right? And they're kind of like throwaway exercises just for you to practice, right? But then in the next section, there's a Twitter section. That this is an application, a product that we're going to be building throughout the semester, right? Which is so the labs are very specific to just this 1 week, right? And this specific assignment, whereas Twitter is relevant across multiple assignments across the entire semester. Okay, this one asks you to create a under public Twitter navigation HTML asks you to create this URL that has hyperlinks that allow you to navigate to places, much like we did here, right? And the, there's a, a list, right, that presumably might have multiple hyperlinks that allow you to navigate to different places, right? So this is asking you to do a list, an unordered list of hyperlinks that allow you to navigate to different places, okay? Now, those places don't necessarily have to exist, right? Even though you create these hyperlinks going to home.html, explore.html, notifications.html, those pages don't actually have to exist, right? You might be linking to them, right? And if they don't exist, right? For instance, I might create a hyperlink here, right, in the canvas to a dashboard. I might create a hyperlink here that says this hyperlink goes to, oops, href to dashboard.html, where there is no dashboard.html. Okay, so that if I refresh this, and I click on dashboard, it's going to give me a big 404, right? It says, oops, there is no dashboard.html, right? So it's complaining, and that's fine. That's totally okay, right? We are going to create a few of these, just like we created account, we created grades, we created syllabus. We did not create dashboard, right? That's okay. So some of these we are going to build, right? I think we're going to create home, explore for now, right? Later on, we'll come back and build a profile and blah, 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 right? But you'll create the hyperlinks, and then we'll fill out, and implement all those documents later, right? In later assignments, right? So here's a hyperlink, right? Getting you started. That links to all the assignments. So please, in the public index.html, provide links to all your assignments, assignment 2, Twitter, right? So we ask you here on your own, now that you know how to do hyperlinks, now you know how to do drop downs and text areas and images and divs, right? And paragraphs, blah, blah, blah. We ask you build this home screen. Build this home screen, right? So in the lab, we handhold you a lot, right? We say, copy this, make sure it renders this, copy this, make sure it renders this, right? But then in the Twitter section, we kind of leave you on your own, right? Do this on your own, right? Apply what you just learned in labs, right, to build this on your own, okay? We ask you to do the home, the tweet screen, the profile screen. Profile screen allows you to, create a form for editing the profile, right? Like the name, the bio, like we did here in class. Okay. And then the last section is a challenge, and this is only for graduate students. Right? So the undergrads don't need to do this. But we ask you to explore a few other topics like iframes, embedding other websites inside of your website, embedding HTML, YouTube videos, right? Embedding, Google Slides, right? And also playing around with scalable vector graphics, right? So that you can draw shapes like rectangles or circles or stars, okay? And then anchors that is going to allow you to implement like a table of content, right? That allows you to navigate, click on a table of content, be able to jump down to the bottom of the screen or any subsection in between, okay? Right? So yeah, that is the assignment. It asks you to do all your work in a separate branch, the A2 branch. Okay, all your work should be done in A2 branch. And then once you're done, right, deploy it and Netlify. Let me show you Netlify. You can configure it What's this one? Go here. If you go to settings or domain, okay, site settings or domain settings. Okay, if you go to settings and you go to build and deploy, right? You can say branches here in branches, right? You can say edit settings. Right now, the default configuration is that only the main branch gets deployed. You know, but you can configure in edit settings that you want to deploy all the branches. You know, that means that now not only the main branch will be deployed if it changes, right? Whenever you push something to the main branch, it will redeploy. But if you create new branches like branch A2, A3, A4, like we're going to do throughout the semester, it will deploy each branch in its own URL, right? For this assignment, because you're deploying to A2, the branch A2, by default, what it'll do is that it'll deploy branch A2 to the same URL where your regular app is, like wherever it's deployed. But now you can see the new branch deployed to a different URL with A2 -- in front of the original URL. Okay, that means that we're going to be able to see all the branches deployed to different URLs, right? The main branch doesn't have any branch name in front of it, but then all the other branches will have, A2 -- A3 -- A4 -- A5 -- so each branch will be based on the regular URL, but prepending the name of the branch -- Make sense? Try it out. Okay. There's a question in the chat. Is it possible to unlock CSS part earlier so we can preview and prepare for it? Thank you. I mean, so I have a problem with making content available before it's time. So the thing is that I'm concerned that you might get way ahead, and if we have to change something, in the current section or the current module that we're in, I'm concerned that then any work that you do ahead might affect. So I'll open it up. Please don't start the assignment. Please don't start working on material that we haven't covered yet officially, right? And if you do, know that it can change without notice, right? And you might have to rework some of it. Okay, so I'll unlock it, and I'll trust that you will only view it, edit. So I'm going to unlock it, so you can take a look at the CSS content now. Okay. All right. Anything else in chat? For the project, I think the group members I found are in the Thursday section. Would that be all right? Yes. Sections, across sections, you can work together with other sections. My concern is availability and coordinating with other folks. But since you're already remote, I guess it doesn't really matter to you, since you're already working with remote folks. Yeah, my only concern is that you might know some of these, or just make sure you trust the folks that you are working with. And what else? At the end of semester, I will ask you to fill out a form to make sure to see who joined which team. Even if you're working with other teams, there has to be one of you that creates a team, right? So we can grade the team, and whatever grade that is given, we're going to give everybody the same grade across the team members in that team, even if then there's different sections. Yeah, it makes it really hard for us to keep track of who's who. That's fine. All right. Anything else? All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.